guys, Matt from Damond Motorsports here, and today we're going to be installing our drag brake setup on this Focus ST. Very similar install to the Mazdaspeed 3, so yeah, let's jump right in. So a little bit about this kit. This is a Focus drag brake kit, same thing with our Mazdaspeed 3, same drag brake kit, very similar setup. With this, we're using Wilwood's Dyno Pro calipers. They're going to save a whole lot of weight over these factory steel ones. These are aluminum versus that. Those are factory steel calipers. So you're going to save a lot of weight there. We're also using two-piece rotors. So here's the rotor disc itself. The hat itself is going to be aluminum. You'll see us assembling those together pretty soon. That's going to replace this big big cast iron rotor. So all the tools you'll need for the install are going to be right here or in the description below. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pull off the calipers themselves. For this, you're going to need an 18mm socket mainly. So the first thing we're going to do is take off this caliper, two 18mm bolts here on the back. A nice little caliper hanging tool. You can use a zip tie as well. Or just something to hang the caliper up out of the way, so that way it's not just dangling by the brake line. Next thing we're gonna do is take the rotor off. Sometimes these can be a little tricky, especially if they're corroded like this and could be rusted to the hub. Just give it a few hammer smacks. It should come off relatively easily. There we go. Set that aside. Next up, we're gonna take this brake shield off. No longer need that, get that out the way. That's just a few 10mm bolts. Weight savings. So next up, what we're gonna do is remove the brake line. First thing we're gonna do for this is unbolt it right here from the strut. This is just a little 8mm bolt. Sure, we can speed this up with the magic of editing. This little bolt will be getting reused, so we'll just kind of put it back in place to get the line out of here, so that way we don't lose it. And next up is going to be taking the line itself off. First, we're going to break this hard line here. This is just an 11mm. Shouldn't be too bad. Sweet. Make sure you have a catch pan ready. This is going to leak some fluid, as you can see. And then something else handy to have too, we just have a little rubber cap here, so that way it's not going to just constantly drain all the fluid out of the master and cause issues bleeding later on. So yeah, just threw this cap on here so that way we're not leaking all the fluid out of the whole brake system. Gonna bleed everything anyway, but just don't want to have everything drain completely dry. All right, so next up, we're gonna actually remove the brake line here from this mount. Little screwdriver here, kind of pry this clip out. All right, now this guy's out. Now that that's out, we can actually fully remove the caliper from the vehicle and set it aside. So next up, we're gonna clean up this hub surface here. You can do this with a wire brush. I've got an actual special tool that's meant specifically for this. Kind of goes over the studs and it cleans the studs as well. So yeah, the main thing is you just want to make sure any rust buildup where the rotor itself is going to sit, so that way nothing's uneven when you go to put everything down. All right, so now we're going to show you guys to put on the caliper bracket. You're going to want to have the Damond Motorsports logo facing outward as such, and then you're going to thread in the provided caliper bolts in from the back side. All right, so now we're gonna torque these bolts down. On the Mazdaspeeds, you're gonna wanna tighten these down to 60 foot-pounds. On the Ford here, it's a little bit bigger bolt, so we're gonna go these to 100 foot-pounds. All right, so next what we're gonna do is we're going to mount the rotor hat to the rotor itself using the provided bolts and hardware. So next up, we're gonna torque these in a crisscross pattern, and they get tightened to 155 inch-pounds. All right, now that these are in, we do highly recommend safety wiring it. For the time of this install video, we're not gonna go ahead and do that just because it takes a long time. There's tons and tons of videos on how to safety wire bolts on the internet, so that's not a big deal. We do have also in our full written instructions on our website, we go into more detail on exactly how these need to be safety wired. So now that the rotor hat itself is on the rotor disc, take the rotor, put it back on our hub here. You see we've got two bolt patterns on here. One is for the Mazdaspeeds, the other one is for the Focus ST and RS. So now that the rotor's on, one thing you should do is just take a lug nut, just kind of snug this down so that way it's going to stay in place, be a little bit easier to install. So next up, we're going to install our brake fitting here into the caliper. So in order to do that, we're just going to pull off this tape here, which leaves a nice little residue. Be sure to clean that off. So here are the supplied fittings and everything. These are the ones themselves that go into the caliper. We're gonna put a little bit of Teflon tape around here because this is a NPT tapered thread. So in order for these to seal properly, you do need some sort of sealing tape or paste. And for that, we're just gonna wrap it around like so. Don't need to get crazy with it, just a couple revolutions is fine. Go around it with my fingers for good measure, just make sure it's on good. So yeah, now we've got some Teflon tape on here. And go ahead and install this fitting into the caliper. All right, so now we're gonna install this fitting into the caliper. And since this caliper is going on the right side of the vehicle, we want this fitting to be pointing straight up. And it is a tapered thread, so it doesn't need to go all the way into the caliper. You can actually damage the threads doing that. Just gonna get it snugged up like so to where it's pointing straight up. Sweet, now this guy is done and this caliper is ready to go onto the caliper bracket. Then the caliper bracket can go onto the vehicle. Regardless if you have a Mazdaspeed or a Ford, you're going to need to put these washers under each of the provided bolts. If you do not use these washers, you'll actually run the bolts into the rotor, which is not something you want to do. So now from here, take the caliper and thread these bolts into the caliper bracket. So these are a standard bolt. It's a 9/16 is the socket size you'll need to tighten these ones down. All right, so we're gonna now torque these bolts down to 40 foot-pounds. All right, so now that the caliper's on, the last kind of final steps are gonna be putting the brake line on, as well as putting the pads into the caliper. So here I have a grommet that we're installing onto this brake line. I just have a pair of snap ring pliers, something to spread it to make it go on here a little bit easier, just because it's a little tricky. This is a grommet that we include with the kit, because I'm not a fan of how the grommets included with the brake lines fit. So now we're gonna take this brake line with a grommet. We're gonna slide this here right into our strut. A little bit of oil might help as well. So we're just cinching this down. That should be good for that. Next, we're going to install this line onto this fitting. This doesn't need any Teflon tape because this is a flare fitting. And then we'll just tighten this snug with our 11mm wrench. That is good. All right, so next up, we're going to take this supplied fitting here, pull our cap off our brake line, get some brake fluid flowing. Just pissing out. Next up, I'm going to take this supplied little spring clip here, get that started in place. All right, so now we're just going to tighten these lines together. We have here an 11/16 and our 11mm. So we'll just use the 11/16, just kind of hold that guy in place while we tighten the line itself into this fitting. Now that that's done, we're going to pull this cap off, getting ready for a little fluid. Tighten our brake line on. And then let's snug this down with our 11. And when we snug this, we're also going to want to just kind of hold this guy just so nothing gets bent. Sweet, now that is all done. Kind of wipe that extra brake clean off. If you get any brake clean on the body, you're going to want it, or any painted surface really for that matter, you're going to want to clean it with some water or some soapy water right away because brake clean can eat through paint. All right, next up we're going to put our brake pads in. What's nice about fixed calipers like this is that a lot of times you can just put the brake pads in right from the top. You don't actually have to physically take the caliper off. So that's the case with these. So we're going to slide it, make sure you have the friction material facing the rotor. Slide that guy in, slide our next guy in. And then the pads are simply held in with this retaining pin here. So this guy will go through. And then once you're set everything, you're going to bend these tabs back just using a screwdriver, pair of pliers, or a hammer. So once that's all good, our system's pretty good. One final thing that we're going to go through and do is we're just going to clean the rotor surface, especially if you've touched it with your fingers. So as you can see, there's a bunch of fingerprints on this rotor. So we're just going to take some brake clean and a rag and just go through and clean all the oil from our fingerprints off of the rotor. So you want to do this just because you don't want any of those oils going into your brake pads when you're trying to bed the system in. And additionally, while we can't see it on the other side, we're still going to go through and clean the other side of the rotor. So now that's done. The final step once this kit is installed is you're going to need to bleed your brakes. So whether you're using a pressure bleeder or you've got a friend with you, pumping on the brake pedal, the main thing to keep in mind is you're going to want to only loosen these tiny little bleeders up top. You don't want to loosen the whole thing. You're going to first start with the inboard side. You don't have to touch the ones on the bottom. Air travels up, so we'll want to start here with the inboard side and then work our way to the outboard side. So you'll bleed the brakes until it is free of any air bubbles. From there, you'll just go out for a quick test drive, make sure the system is good, make sure your pedal is nice and firm. You're going to want to basically a factory feeling brake pedal. It might be a little firmer just because we've got stainless lines in here now. So that's how you install our drag brake setup on the Focus ST, Focus RS, and Mazdaspeed 3. There's a lot of different options with this kit, so if you have any questions about any particular install features or what specific kit to get for yourself, don't hesitate to reach out to Damond Motorsports. We'll be glad to assist you. But yeah, if you're looking to get this kit yourself, check out DamondMotorsports.com.